When the meeting room door closed behind me, I didn't know I was stepping out of my old life for the last time, but the silence in that room felt wrong immediately. No casual greetings. No small talk. Just faces turned slightly away, eyes fixed on papers, screens, anything but me. I am Natalie Brooks, 37 years old, a business development manager living in Chicago, and that morning I had walked into the executive meeting room of Redwood Strategy Group to present the most important plan of my career, the growth strategy that would move the company from the Midwest to the West Coast. It was a plan I had spent 3 months building. Every evening, every weekend, every quiet night at my kitchen table, I had worked on it. I ran the numbers myself. I wrote the risk analyses line by line. I negotiated early-stage conversations with investors and logistics partners. Weeks ago, the board had reviewed the plan and approved it step by step. Every approval email ended the same way: "Looks good, Natalie. Move forward." My name was on everything. At the head of the table sat Mark Ellison, our 51-year-old CEO. His posture was relaxed, almost bored, as if this meeting were an inconvenience. Next to him was Karen Miller from HR, 44, professional smile permanently switched off. In front of her lay a thick folder. When I noticed the label on it, Natalie Brooks, my chest tightened. Not fear yet. Just instinct. Mark checked his watch. "Let's begin," he said, his voice calm, controlled, cold. I stood and started the presentation. The first slides passed without interruption, but the silence felt heavy, unnatural. On the third slide, Mark raised his hand. "Natalie," he said, "why are you explaining this in so much detail?" I paused. "Because these details are what make the expansion viable. One error in the cost structure puts the entire project at risk." Mark smiled slightly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "That's exactly your issue," he said. "You obsess over details and miss the big picture." The room shifted. Not loudly, quietly. Karen continued writing without looking up. A few board members exchanged glances. I kept going, but from that moment on, the tone changed completely. Every number I presented was questioned. Every assumption I explained had already been approved weeks earlier, yet now they were treated as if I were improvising. Mark interrupted constantly. Sometimes mid-sentence. Sometimes mid-word. "Are you sure about that figure? Isn't this overly cautious? Do we really need this much preparation?" Each question wasn't about the plan. It was about me. When I finished, the room fell silent again. Mark leaned back, interlaced his fingers, and looked directly at me for the first time that morning. "Natalie," he said slowly, "we've been evaluating your role for quite some time." My heart started racing, not because I was surprised, but because I knew this conversation should never happen here, in front of everyone. "We've decided not to continue with you on the company's path forward." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. "I don't understand," I said. "Are you talking about the project?" "No," Mark replied without blinking. "Your position is terminated, effective today." The words landed like a controlled explosion. Karen slid the folder toward the center of the table. "This isn't personal," she said flatly. "It's strictly a business decision." Mark nodded. "You're good at execution," he added, "but you're not operating at a leadership level." No one spoke. No one objected. No one even looked at me. That was the moment I understood this wasn't a decision made that morning. This was a script, and I had just walked into the final scene. "Please place your access card on the table," Karen said. "And hand over your laptop." Mark stood. "Security will escort you out." I felt the anger rise, sharp and burning, but I swallowed it. I placed my card down. I picked up my bag. I pushed my chair back quietly and walked out. Behind the glass walls, Employees stared at their screens, pretending nothing was happening. In the elevator, the doors closed and my reflection stared back at me, calm face, steady eyes. And in that moment, one thought settled in with absolute clarity. They believed they had humiliated me. What they didn't know was that every line of that growth plan, the investors, the early agreements, the leverage, was still in my hands. When I stepped out of the elevator, I handed over my security badge without a word, and no one said goodbye, no one wished me luck, as if I had never existed there at all. Outside, the cold Chicago wind hit my face, but I wasn't in shock. On the contrary, my mind was painfully clear. That meeting hadn't been a decision, it was a performance, and I hadn't been a participant, I had been the target. When I got home, I dropped my bag on the couch and opened my laptop without even taking off my coat because the relaxed expression on Mark's face wouldn't leave my mind. A man that calm doesn't make a decision like that in the moment. My company email access was already gone, but my personal archive was still intact, and I began searching through messages I had saved for months. That's when I found the first crack in the wall, a short message Mark had sent to the CFO, Ethan Moore, dated July, 8 months before the day I was fired, saying, "Natalie's plan is solid, but she's not the right person to present it." My throat tightened, but I kept going. Ethan's reply hit even harder, "Let's hand it to Daniel. His face fits better." I knew Daniel, 2 levels below me, technically inexperienced, but always present at golf outings and late-night drinks with management. I opened files, checked calendars, compared versions, and piece by piece the truth came together. My plan had been circulating for months without my name on it. Even the slides shown in that meeting room were nothing more than a rearranged version of my original draft. That was the moment I understood this wasn't just a firing, it was theft. I called the only person I still trusted inside the company, operations manager Lena Parker, and when she answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell me," I said, "how long have they known?" There was a pause, then she sighed. "Natalie, I wasn't allowed to say anything, but they've been interviewing someone else for your role under a different title since September." My chest tightened. "Who?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Daniel," she said. It still hurt. "Why now?" I asked. Her voice turned firm. "Because the investor presentation is coming up, and you couldn't be there." When I ended the call, I didn't cry. Everything was finally clear. They had humiliated me publicly to silence me, believing the plan now belonged to them, but there was one critical detail they didn't understand: that plan wasn't just a presentation. Behind it were contracts signed in my name, preliminary agreements built on my relationships, and leverage they didn't control. I sat at my computer for hours, opening documents one by one, taking notes, connecting threads, and as dawn approached, I said the words out loud: "They think they've kicked me out of the game, but they forgot who built the game." I knew exactly what I was going to do next, but I also knew this: revenge isn't rushed. It's taken at the right moment. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from so you don't miss what comes next. Because now, the real game begins. When I woke up the next morning at 6:40 a.m., before my alarm, I immediately felt that something fundamental had shifted, not because I no longer had a job to go to, but because I now had something far more important to do. As I made my coffee in the quiet kitchen, my mind was unnervingly calm: no panic, no tears, no confusion, only clarity. Before I even opened my computer, I already knew who my first call would be. Robert Klein, 58 years old, senior partner at the San Francisco-based investment fund Westbridge Capital, and the first major investor who had agreed to sit at the table for Redwood's West Coast expansion. Mark hadn't brought him in. Karen hadn't. Daniel certainly hadn't. I had. I was the one who flew him to Chicago, the one who arranged the meetings, the one who made Redwood credible in his eyes. When he answered on the third ring, he sounded surprised. "Natalie? Is everything okay?" he asked, because he had always known me as controlled, precise, unshakable. It's not okay, I said, and I didn't soften my voice. And I'm not going to hide it from you. There was a pause, then he said quietly, tell me. I told him everything, about the meeting, the public firing, the way my plan had been presented without my name, and for the first time, I didn't protect anyone. When I finished, Robert took a slow breath and said, this is serious. But why does this concern me? That was the opening I had been waiting for. Because parts of that plan were never signed, I said, and the preliminary agreements were made in my name. He went silent. Then, so you're telling me the plan currently being pushed forward is legally incomplete? Yes, I replied, and they know it. His voice hardened. I needed to know this. When the call ended, my hands weren't shaking, I felt steady, almost relieved. The first stone had been placed. I immediately opened the second file, the preliminary agreement with Oak Ridge Logistics, the backbone of the West Coast distribution chain, also signed by me. I called Samuel Ortiz, Oak Ridge's operations director, a man who spoke only the language of contracts. Samuel, I said the moment he answered, I no longer have a connection to my company. I heard him inhale sharply. But if they're moving forward using my name, I continued, that creates a problem for you as well. After a brief pause, he asked, why are you telling me this now? Because they're holding a launch meeting today, I said, and they'll expect you to be there. He didn't respond immediately. Then he said, if what you're saying is true, I won't sit at that table. When I hung up, I knew something irreversible had begun. The machinery was moving, but no longer in their direction. That afternoon, I deliberately didn't make a third call, because some moves only work if no one sees them coming. Instead, I spread my notes across the table and began writing names, people who worked with me, partners who trusted me, executives who sat at those tables because I had put them there. The list was longer than I expected. Mark and his team thought they had silenced me, but what they had really done was remove every internal constraint. Now I wasn't playing corporate politics, I was playing reality. As evening settled in, my phone lit up with a message from Lena. Just one sentence, the investor meeting was cancelled today. I smiled, not because I had won anything yet, but because this was confirmation. The first crack had appeared, and no one inside the company understood why. After Lena's message, I left my phone on the table and did nothing for hours, because I've learned that some consequences reveal themselves more clearly in silence than in action, and just before 5 in the evening, the first signal I had been waiting for finally arrived. For the first time since the day they fired me, a call was coming from inside the company, and when I saw Daniel Foster's name on the screen, I felt no hesitation at all. I answered and let him talk, his voice tight and rushed as he asked, Natalie, do you know what happened today? As if we were still on the same side of the table. Yes, I said calmly, your investor meeting was cancelled. There was a pause, then he asked, does this have anything to do with you? I chose my words slowly, deliberately. Daniel, I said, it's no longer appropriate for me to discuss these matters with you. I could hear his breathing change. Look, he said, this situation is getting out of control. I didn't laugh, I didn't raise my voice. Nothing is getting out of control, I replied. You're just not the one controlling it anymore. I ended the call, and less than 10 minutes later, the phone rang again, this time Karen Miller. I had never deleted her number, seeing certain names appear on the screen gives a person strength. Her voice was noticeably softer than usual. Natalie, she began, there may have been some misunderstandings. Whenever I hear that sentence, I know someone is scared. Nothing was misunderstood, I said. You fired me in front of the entire board. She immediately shifted into defense mode. We didn't want it to happen that way, but the process, I don't care about the process, I cut in. I care about the results. Karen fell silent, then spoke again, her voice lower. The company is in a difficult position. Investors are asking questions. That was the sentence I had been waiting for. That's normal, I said, because the person who owns the plan isn't at the table. The plan belongs to the company, she snapped. For the first time, my voice turned sharp. No, I said. That plan is mine, and you know it. I heard her catch her breath. What do you want? She asked, no longer sounding like an HR director, but like someone afraid. I don't want anything, I replied. I'm just watching. When I ended the call, darkness had settled outside, but inside I felt an unfamiliar calm. The roles had reversed. Moments later, another message from Lena came through, longer this time. Mark held 3 emergency meetings today. Legal was brought in. Finance is panicking. Everyone is asking who you've been talking to. I leaned back and closed my eyes, because this was exactly where I expected them to arrive. They had felt powerful the day they fired me. Now, for the first time, they were on the defensive, and I hadn't even entered the room. Late that night, an email arrived in my personal inbox from Mark himself. The subject line contained only 4 words, "We need to talk." I stared at the screen and said quietly to myself, "You don't set the terms anymore," because that message meant one thing and one thing only: they were no longer trying to silence me. They were trying to pull me back. When I saw Mark's email with the subject line, "We need to talk," I didn't reply immediately, because I wasn't the one in a hurry anymore, and I knew that silence was working on their nerves far more effectively than any answer could. Exactly 3 hours later, I sent a single-line response, "Tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Palmer House lobby." Nothing else. I wasn't choosing boardrooms anymore, I was choosing neutral ground. When I entered the hotel the next morning and saw that Mark had arrived before me, I already knew where this meeting stood. He was wearing a dark suit, but his tie was loose, his posture stiff, and his face visibly tired. When he saw me, he stood up quickly and said, "Natalie, I'm glad you came," forcing calm into his voice. I sat down slowly, placed my bag beside the chair, looked straight at him, and said, "If your time is limited, say it now, because mine isn't." Mark cleared his throat. "There have been some misunderstandings at the company," he began, choosing that sentence carefully. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I replied. "It was a planned exclusion." He immediately went on the defensive. "This could have been for your benefit, less pressure, less responsibility." That was when I smiled, because he still believed persuasion was an option. "Mark," I said calmly, "the day you fired me, you lost the right to speak on my behalf." For the first time, he had no response. After a brief silence, he said, "The company is in a difficult position. Investors are pulling back." I nodded. "I know," I said. "They're talking to me." His jaw tightened. "We can fix this," he said quickly, choosing his words. "Consulting. At a very high fee." I didn't laugh. Instead, I took a folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. "This," I said, "contains preliminary discussions with third parties you don't even know about yet." As he leaned forward, I closed the folder with my hand. "And this," I continued, "is an alternative plan, one you haven't even heard the name of." His eyes widened. "What do you want?" he asked, and his voice no longer sounded like a CEO negotiating, but like a man trying to hold on to control. "I don't want anything right now," I said. "I just wanted you to understand that you can't erase me by silencing me." Mark inhaled deeply. "Then why are you here?" he asked. I leaned back slightly and answered without hesitation. "Because one day, I'll come back to this table, but not as an employee." That caught him off guard. "What does that mean?" he asked. I stood up, picked up my bag, and said, "You'll find out soon." I walked away, and he didn't call after me, because there was nothing left for him to say. As I stepped outside the hotel, my phone buzzed with a message from Lena. Just one sentence: "The board has been called for an emergency meeting." I read it once, then again, and in that moment, I understood something clearly. This was no longer about revenge. This was a takeover. After the meeting with Mark at the hotel, I didn't contact anyone, because at this stage words were useless and only action mattered, and the first thing I did was finally acknowledge the power I had held for years without fully using it. I opened my laptop, spread my notes across the table, and asked myself a single question: what was it that truly kept Redwood standing? The answer came immediately: investor confidence and a believable growth story, and both of those had been built through me. That realization led me directly to my next move. That same afternoon, I called Michael Reeves, the 62-year-old founder of the Chicago-based private equity firm Hawthorne Equity, a man who had once told me without hesitation, "If you ever set your own table, I'll be the first to listen." When he answered, there was no surprise in his voice. "Natalie," he said calmly, "I was expecting your call, and in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. There is a company," I told him, "and right now, it's far weaker than it believes." Michael didn't interrupt me, he simply listened as I laid it out plainly: investors pulling back, incomplete plans, a panicked management team, and insiders still feeding me information. When he finally spoke, he asked one precise question: "Are you considering an acquisition?" "Not yet," I replied. "For now, I'm just opening the door." I could hear his approval when he smiled and said, "Send me the numbers, but keep your name out of it." That was exactly what I wanted. After the call, I opened a second file and went through Redwood's financials from the past 2 years, their investor decks, and internal risk reports that had never been meant to leave the company. From the outside, Redwood looked solid, but from the inside, there were deep structural cracks, and I knew every one of them because I was the one who had built those walls. Late in the afternoon, another message arrived from Lena: "Everyone thinks you're talking to Hawthorne, but no one is sure." As I read it, I realized my name had turned into a whisper, and whispers frighten boardrooms far more than direct threats ever do. That night, my phone rang again, this time from a hidden number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was calm and deliberate. "Natalie," he said, "this conversation isn't being recorded." It was Richard Bloom, Redwood's largest individual shareholder, a 60-year-old man who governed with patience rather than noise. "They treated you unfairly," he said. I didn't like that. I didn't respond, because silence, at the right moment, carries more weight than agreement. "Let's have a coffee," he continued. "There are things we should discuss that not everyone knows." When the call ended, I understood there was no turning back. From that point on, I wasn't just a manager who had been pushed out, I was a force being invited in. No one at Redwood realized it yet, but the game was already changing hands. I met Richard Bloom 2 days later at a quiet cafe on Michigan Avenue, because Richard disliked crowded places and didn't want our conversation overheard. It was 2:20 p.m. when we sat down, and while people outside were shopping and everyone inside was focused on their own lives, what was about to be discussed at our table was the kind of conversation that could alter a company's future. Richard was 60 years old, his gray hair perfectly combed as always, and after taking a slow sip of his coffee, he went straight to the point. "The day they fired you," he said calmly, "my shares dropped 6%. He said it the way someone states a fact, not an accusation. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because that drop wasn't about you," he replied. "It was about panic." He studied me for a moment, then added, "My confidence in the board has been shaken, especially in Mark." I didn't hide my side of it either. "Mark thought he was protecting the company by silencing me," I said, "but what he actually destroyed was the story." Richard nodded. "And without a growth story," he said, "this company is just numbers, and right now, the numbers aren't strong." He placed a small notebook on the table, opened it, and slid it toward me. "These are the questions I've been asking the board for the past 3 months without receiving a real answer." As I read through them, I recognized every concern: supply chain exposure, investor confidence, leadership gaps, the same risks I had been raising for months. I looked up. You already know all of this, I said. No one listened. A faint smile crossed his face. I'm listening now, he replied, then lowered his voice. I need to hear this from you, Natalie. If you're given real authority, can you actually turn this company around? I didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't about confidence, it was about control. After a brief pause, I spoke clearly. Yes, I said. But not under the old system. Richard waited. I want real voting power on the board, I continued, and a structure that formally stands behind my plan. He leaned back slightly. Mark will fight that, he said. He will, I replied, but that will be his decision. Richard finished his coffee, then added quietly, you should know something, there are 2 others on the inside who are thinking the same way I am. That sentence shifted everything. I was no longer testing the ground, I was standing on it. As he stood up, Richard looked at me and said, I haven't told anyone yet, but this conversation won't stay here. When I left the cafe, my phone was silent, but that silence wasn't threatening. It meant preparation. There was movement now on the other side of the table, and Mark still didn't know the most important thing, I had begun gaining support from within the board itself. 2 days after my meeting with Richard, Lena's message came through, short, controlled, and unmistakably clear, there's a board meeting today, and the atmosphere is strange. When I read it, I knew exactly where I should have been, but I chose to stay away, because some turning points are better witnessed from the outside. That day, I sat at my desk at home with a single file open in front of me. Inside it was a list of investors Redwood had lost over the past 6 months, cancelled meetings, postponed deals, and next to nearly every entry was the same note, post Natalie. Just before 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Lena, her voice low but charged with tension. Mark is presenting, she said, but no one looks convinced. Minutes later, she called again. Richard just took the floor, she whispered. He asked who wrote the growth plan. I smiled, because that question had finally been spoken aloud in that room. Lena continued, Mark tried to brush it off, but Karen stepped in and said Daniel revised the presentation. In that moment, the picture snapped into focus, everyone was circling the same truth, even if no one was ready to say it directly. A few minutes later, Lena called again, her tone noticeably more serious. Richard just asked, straight out, where is Natalie Brooks? Hearing my name didn't trigger anger or fear, it brought calm. It meant they could no longer pretend I wasn't part of the equation. According to Lena, that was when Mark went on the defensive, insisting, the company is moving forward, but the hesitation in his voice didn't go unnoticed. Near the end of the meeting, another board member spoke up and asked, if the plan isn't working, what's the logic in excluding the person who wrote it? After that, Lena said, the room went completely silent. In her final call, she told me only one thing, the meeting ended early, and Mark left the room alone. When I hung up, I knew there was no turning back. Boards don't shout, and they don't threaten, they start asking questions. And once the questions begin, power shifts quietly. Late that afternoon, an official email arrived in my inbox from the corporate secretary. The subject line was simple, meeting request. I leaned back in my chair as I read it, because this was no longer a request, it was a necessity. And very soon, it would become clear who would be sitting in which chair at the table. When I read the email from the corporate secretary for the second time, it became clear that this was no ordinary meeting invitation. The language was careful, formal, and urgent, and more importantly, they had never addressed me this way before. The sentence, the board would like to meet with you in person as soon as possible, made one thing unmistakable, I was no longer someone they could sideline. Even the location spoke volumes. Not the company headquarters, but an independent law office downtown, meaning they were no longer afraid to take internal matters outside the building. On the day of the meeting, the person who greeted me wasn't Mark or Karen, but the company's outside counsel, Thomas Reed. He shook my hand and said, "Thank you for coming," choosing every word with visible care. When I entered the conference room, 5 people were already seated at the table. Richard Bloom was there, along with 2 other board members. Mark sat in the far corner, silent, his folder still closed, a detail that told me everything I needed to know. Thomas opened the meeting. "Natalie, we're here today because of the developments of the past few weeks." I nodded, but didn't speak. It was their turn to explain. Richard took the floor and spoke directly. "The company is facing a serious crisis of confidence," he said, "and the primary reason is that the growth plan is no longer sustainable." Then he looked straight at me. "Without the plan you wrote," he added deliberately. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, but I didn't rush. Thomas spoke again. "As the board, we would like to present you with an official offer." He placed a single-page document in the center of the table. I didn't look at it as he continued, not as a consultant, but as a senior return. Mark shifted in his chair for the first time, but remained silent. "The position?" I asked calmly. After a brief pause, Thomas answered, "Chief Strategy and Growth Officer." Everyone at the table understood what that title meant. It redefined the balance of power. Richard added, "This role includes direct reporting to the board. This is not a continuation of the old system." In that moment, the picture was complete. The same structure that had removed me was now admitting it couldn't survive without me. Still, the title and salary weren't what mattered most. I glanced at the bottom of the document and broke the silence. "There's something missing here." Thomas looked up. "What would that be?" I met Mark's eyes briefly, then turned back to Thomas. "Clear boundaries of authority," I said, "and an explicit acknowledgement of what was done in the past." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard nodded immediately. He understood. Thomas began taking notes. Mark finally lifted his head. There was no anger in his expression, only fatigue. "There's no need to drag this out," he said, his voice tight. "You're putting the company in a difficult position." I felt no guilt when I replied. "No," I said evenly. "What put the company in a difficult position was your attempt to silence me." No one contradicted me. Thomas cleared his throat. "The terms can be revised," he said. I stood up. "They will be," I replied, but this time, with my pen. I slid the folder back across the table. "I've heard your offer," I said. "My answer won't be today." Richard looked at me and smiled faintly. He knew exactly what that meant. As I walked out of the meeting, one thing was certain: they had been forced to call me back. But the real question was no longer if I would return, it was how. After I left that meeting, I didn't go home. Instead, I went straight to my small office on Michigan Avenue, because I knew this decision couldn't be made with emotion, it had to be made with cold, deliberate logic. The moment I sat at my desk, I opened the old files, emails Mark had personally signed, presentations where my name had been deliberately removed, internal revision notes sent to the board that were never shared with me. I went through every document carefully, because if I was going to return, this wouldn't be a story about being forgiven or welcomed back. It would be a formal, irreversible shift in power. By 2 a.m., I began drafting the counteroffer, writing each point with precision, using language that left no room for interpretation. The first condition was absolute, direct reporting to the board, with Mark holding no authority over me in any form. The second was harsher and intentional, an official internal record of the company's strategic failures over the past 2 years, with responsibility assigned by name. The third point was the most personal, and the most important. Within the first 90 days of my return, I would conduct full performance evaluations across all departments, and no manager, regardless of position, would be protected or untouchable during that process. When I closed the file, I knew this wasn't a negotiation, it was a test. The next morning, I called Thomas Reed and said simply, "The counteroffer is ready," without hesitation. After a brief pause, he replied, "The board is meeting today." I can forward it. Forward it, I said, but I don't want any further communication until there's an answer. Then I waited. 2 days passed. On the afternoon of the third day, my phone rang. It was Richard Bloom. He didn't waste time. Some of the points caused serious debate, he said. I stood by the window as I answered calmly, that was the intention. Richard exhaled slowly. Mark reacted particularly strongly to the second point. I smiled without meaning to. I'm not surprised, I said. His voice lowered slightly. But you should know, the majority of the board agrees with you. I didn't end the call. What's the decision? I asked. After a short pause, he said, the third point was accepted exactly as written. The first was accepted with a minor adjustment. When it came to the second point, he hesitated. And? I asked. The names will be written, he finally said, but Mark's name won't be explicitly included, for now. My tone sharpened immediately. Then there's no deal. Richard tried to respond, but I stopped him. This isn't revenge, I said. It's balance. There was a long silence on the line before he said quietly, I'll take this back to the board. When I hung up, I felt no fear. For the first time, I was fully prepared to walk away from the table, and that made me far more dangerous than they realized. Late that evening, a message appeared from Mark, the first he had ever sent me directly. You don't need to make this personal. I read it and didn't reply, because words no longer mattered. Documents did. And the email that arrived the next morning was about to change everything. I remember it wasn't even 7 o'clock when I opened the email the next morning, coffee still warm in my hand, and the moment I saw Thomas Reed's name on the screen, I knew this wouldn't be an ordinary day. The message was short and unmistakably final. The board is meeting for the final time today at 11 a.m. We request your attendance. There were no polite introductions, no soft language. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a summons. When I arrived, the meeting wasn't held in the company building but on the board's private floor, and the moment I was let into the room, I felt the shift immediately. The atmosphere was heavier, quieter, cautious in a way that only appears when people know the outcome will be permanent. When I took my seat, Thomas placed a folder in front of me and said, "Your counteroffer has been revised." I opened it without hesitation and went straight to the second point, reading every line carefully, past decisions, timelines, consequences, and at the very bottom, there was a single sentence that changed everything. Primary responsibility for this strategic shift in direction lies with CEO Mark Ellison. I looked up. No one spoke. Mark was sitting there, his face pale, his posture rigid, and for the first time, it was clear, he no longer controlled the room. Richard Bloom finally broke the silence. This decision was not made easily. I answered without looking away from Mark. The easy ones never make it to this table. Mark tried to stand, but Thomas stopped him with a quiet gesture. This is not a defensive meeting, he said firmly. This is a meeting of record. Mark clenched his jaw and turned to me. You're burning everyone by doing this, he said, his voice strained. I remained calm. No, I replied evenly. I'm just turning on the light. Silence fell again. Thomas then read the terms aloud: my authority boundaries, direct reporting to the board, the 90-day evaluation process, each point precise, final, and non-negotiable. When he finished, Richard looked at me and asked, "Do you accept returning under these terms?" I waited, because moments like this should never be rushed. Yes, I said, with one addition. Every eye lifted. This file, I continued, will not stay buried in company archives. It will be included in the board's annual report. Thomas nodded once. Accepted. Mark lowered his head, knowing there was no way back. The signatures were placed, the folder closed, and when the meeting ended, everyone stood, but no one spoke. As I walked toward the door, Mark called out behind me, "Do you think you've won?" I stopped, turned, and answered clearly. "No," I said. "I just took back what was taken from me." When I stepped into the hallway, there was no rush of victory, no celebration, only balance. And balance, I knew, would soon make it very clear who would fall next. When I walked into the building at 8 o'clock on my first day back, I felt every set of eyes on me, but those looks were no longer what they used to be. They weren't dismissive or superior anymore, they carried curiosity, unease, and quiet calculation, because the balance had shifted and everyone could sense it. When I stepped out of the elevator, I saw Mark standing in the hallway. Our eyes met, but we didn't exchange greetings. There was no need. Everything that needed to be said had already been written, in documents, reports, and signatures. The weeks that followed were quiet. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches, no slammed doors or whispered apologies. Revenge doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it shows up in meeting minutes, in rewritten job descriptions, in the way someone's words no longer carry weight. And Mark's fall happened exactly like that. At the end of the 90-day evaluation period, when departmental performance reports were presented, his numbers were read aloud in front of the board. There were no excuses left, no one to blame. The room stayed silent, and the decision was made just as quietly. Mark was removed from his position, his severance approved, and his exit finalized. When he packed his things that day, no one stood beside him. No one said, "I'm sorry." No one said, "You deserved it." Sometimes the system delivers its harshest judgment through silence. Later, when I returned to my office and looked out at the city through the window, I understood something clearly for the first time. This story was never just about what happened to me. It was about everyone who has been silenced, overlooked, had their work taken and their voice dismissed with words like, "Don't overreact." And maybe you, listening right now, have been ignored at a table, erased from a meeting, or watched someone else receive credit for what you built. I want you to know this: revenge isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about waiting, preparing, and placing the right sentence in the right document at the exact moment it can no longer be ignored. I came back, but not as who I used to be. I came back with boundaries, with clarity, without the need to prove myself. And maybe that's the real message of this story: justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it comes, it rarely misses its mark. If you've listened this far and found a piece of yourself in these moments, know that you're not alone. And if this story resonated with you, liking it, subscribing, and sharing where you're listening from helps stories like this continue to be told. Your story may not have been told yet, but as long as your voice survives, nothing is truly lost. And maybe one day, you'll stand up from your own table and say, "I'm writing the terms now." When that day comes, this story will be complete, with you. Thank you for listening from beginning to end. Every minute you stayed here and walked through this journey proves that what was told truly mattered. Thank you.